Greetings and welcome to the Planning Commission regular meeting, November 7th, 2024. Call to order and call for roll.
Pearson.
Here.
Willenbring.
Here.
Campbell.
Here.
McCauley is absent. He had a personal issue to address. Wilson.
Here.
Diata also had a personal issue to address. And Hagan.
Here.
Okay, thank you very much. Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
There's a modification that we'd like to do for the agenda, is move Council Member Ingebrigtsen's update up to item right after open forum.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Pass the agenda as approved. Approval of the minutes. Anyone have any comments or changes to the minutes? These are from August 1st, 2024. Hearing none, I'll look for a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? You'll abstain, okay. Open forum. This is a time when people can come forward to speak to any item that's not on the agenda. So I will open the forum. See no one in the audience, I guess I'll close the open forum right now. Thank you. Councilmember Ingebrigtsen.
Just a couple of quick updates. The Tanner's Lake development continues to move ahead. We're working diligently to get that done as soon as possible. And the other thing, we did have a workshop item for, was it a PUD amendment behind Forefront for the apartments, or was it just zoning? Which one?
The Forefront PUD amendment.
Yeah. Developers interested in putting apartments actually behind the Forefront building, basically between the building and the Willowbrook homes. There's a parcel of land there that's not great for commercial or warehouse, so the council seemed pretty receptive to it. So those are the two updates I have. You guys have anything for me?
Thank
All
you.
right. Yep.
Planning Commission review is new business, a public hearing on an ordinance amendment to add definitions and designate appropriate zoning districts for cannabis businesses.
Thank you, Chair. So I will tee it up and then I'll hand it over to Max, who actually knows what he's talking about on this topic in terms of the regulations. So yeah, let me clarify that. So a little bit of introduction here. So the state approved an adult use cannabis bill last year to legalize cannabis businesses and adult use of cannabis. The legislature also created the OCM. So that's the Office of Cannabis Management, the state agency responsible for regulating the industry. And state statute limits the regulations that cities can impose on adult use cannabis type uses. But however, cities can still adopt reasonable restrictions on the operations for these businesses and limit the number of establishments in their corporate boundaries. But the use itself cannot be prohibited. So in other words, the city cannot outright zone, or the city can't zone out this type of use. The city of Oakdale adopted a moratorium for cannabis-related businesses in September of 2023. And this act, it was done in anticipation of the state establishing applicable regulations. And ahead of the cannabis businesses being able to operate in Oakdale, the city is bringing forward a proposed amendment for new cannabis-related definitions and also designating certain zoning districts where uses would be appropriate. So there is a draft ordinance that we'll go through in just a moment, and it follows the OCM's guidelines and also state law, the cannabis bill. The draft was prepared by the city attorney's office. And a couple other things here. Cannabis businesses must be properly licensed through the state, and when the state receives an application, they will notify the city of the request, and the city will have to certify that the zoning is appropriate for the business and the location, and also building and fire code if that's applicable to the site as well, just for compliance. So other portions of the city's ordinance, for example, Chapter 9, that's business license regulations. That will be updated as well to address this type of use, and those chapters will be reviewed by the city council. So essentially, we're just focusing on Chapter 25, the zoning section of our ordinance. And with that, I will hand it off to Max.
Yep. Thanks, Luke. And I'll just walk through some components of the ordinance and exactly what is changing. And just as a reminder, this is in particular looking at the definitions of cannabis and then which districts within the city are appropriate for it. Other components that will be govern cannabis that cities are allowed to change, including operation of business hours, the number of stores, and then any buffer requirements from certain types of businesses. Those will be handled by our city's licensing department, and that chapter is likely to be amended at the second city council meeting later this month. So walking through, here we have the general zoning districts for the city of Oakdale. So we've added in a few definitions.
Sorry to interrupt you. So what you're seeing there on the screen, the red text that's underlined, that is new proposed text. And the existing sections of the ordinance, that is just in the regular black text.
So we have a number of new business types that we're adding into the definitions, and these definitions come directly from the state and pertain to the various types of licenses that will be given out by the Office of Cannabis Management. First, we have cannabis cultivation business. So that's going to be anyone operating in the growth of cannabis, curing, packaging, et cetera. That also does include cannabis mezzo businesses, which function similarly to in a way where how breweries create the liquor on site and then also sell it on site. A mezzo business would grow on site and then sell the product directly to consumers on site as well. Cannabis delivery is another definition we have here. So that's going to be wholesale or direct-to-consumer transportation. Cannabis combination, that's similar to that mezzo business component where that would include both growth and direct retail sales. Cannabis lounges. So this is not like a smoking lounge or a hookah lounge. This would be solely for consuming cannabis via edibles, drinks, or other forms of hemp or cannabis products that are not smoked. Cannabis or hemp industrial businesses. So that's going to encompass generally that production process and deliveries, manufacturing, packaging, medical growing, et cetera. Just a note that we're not likely to see much in way of cultivation here in the metro, given that we don't have much farmland available within the more urban and suburban cities in the 7-county area. However, it is possible that we could see a request for cultivation and growth in an industrial setting. So that's why we have included these. Additionally, we have cannabis retailer or hemp retailers. So that's just going to be your direct-to-consumer retail operations. And that includes lower potency hemp edibles. So those are the products that you are seeing now on the market, say at liquor stores or gas stations. Those are not technically cannabis products. They are derived from the hemp plant and have to meet various regulations to be under a certain percentage of THC by weight. So as we move on, we can look at where these businesses are proposed to be located. So someone had asked about where our districts line up in the city. I did pull up a copy of the zoning map. So here we have the city's zoning map. Generally, these red areas are going to be our commercial districts. So that's neighborhood commercial and community commercial. And then up here is where most of our heavy industry is concentrated. And the other lighter gray throughout the city, that's going to be industrial office. So with that in mind, in the neighborhood commercial setting, we are proposing that cannabis lounges be permitted as well as general cannabis retail. C2 is where the majority of our commercial parcels are, so that allows for the majority of consumer-facing retail products, goods, and services. So here we have Cannabis Lounge as well, in addition to cannabis or hemp retailer. And these do not include the mezzo businesses that contain both growth and retail operations. In addition, we have some proposals for the industrial office district. So that includes cannabis delivery and transportation and cannabis lounges as well. And for the general industrial district, which functions similar to a heavy industrial district, that is where we would allow growth operations, including cannabis combination businesses and general cannabis or hemp industrial businesses, which includes that growth component. So that sums up the majority of, or that sums up all of the changes that are being proposed within the zoning ordinance. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions. And as a reminder, this is a public hearing.
You've got references all throughout this about City Code 918, 9-185. What's that say? Why is it in here in all these? What's that restricting that we can't see right now?
Yeah, so that is a chapter that has not been finalized yet. There's an early draft available in a council workshop packet from a while ago, but ultimately that would be the licensing component that we described earlier, which would pertain to the actual business regulations. State statute states that those need to be handled through licensing rather than zoning. And that's going to include the components such as the hours of which those businesses can operate, how far they should be from certain businesses, or including schools, parks where children might play, child care centers, treatment facilities. So there's a buffer component that we're allowed to put in. That draft will include that, as well as whether or not there will be a limit on the number of businesses within the city. And again, that has to be handled through licensing rather than zoning.
Now, this sort of crosses over into our next area tonight, but I see in the current one, cannabis is allowed in C1, it's allowed in C2, it's allowed in general industrial. But I noticed that in the one coming up tonight, it's not allowed under mixed use, where we have like clubs, lodges, breweries, distilleries, taverns, tap rooms. They're all allowed in mixed use, so they conform over to what we're looking at now. But cannabis doesn't go into mixed use in the future one. So why is that an outlier from these related businesses?
Thank you, Vice Chair. That's a really good question. With the HKGI Comprehensive Code Update Project, when we first started that project, we weren't sure what cannabis regulations the city would take on. So we were looking to update those in the districts later on once the city council had determined some direction. So ultimately, we drafted those use tables that say the different types of businesses that are permitted. We first started that about a month ago when we weren't sure where this ordinance would be headed. We can absolutely update that to accommodate it. Because again, part of the component with state statute is we can't zone these businesses out of business. So we want to make sure that we do address that in the zoning code update.
And has there been anything added into our ordinance right now that the city added that deviates from what the state has been proposing, or is this pretty much boilerplate from the state on everything here?
This is largely from the state, and it was drafted by our legal department. So this is in compliance with everything that's listed in the Adult Use Cannabis Act.
Since you covered all my questions.
I have a question. So what about people growing it in their yards?
So that would be handled by the state.
So that's not, okay.
Yeah, generally here we're looking at business regulations in terms of home growth or anything like that. That's largely handled by the Office of Cannabis Management. The city does have an ordinance that was passed in fall of 2023 that restricts where you can smoke cannabis only in private areas, not public areas, so not sidewalks, not parking lots that are accessible to the general public, not businesses, much more of a residential setting. We do have that regulation on personal consumption, but otherwise most regulations are handled by the state.
I have a comment. Looking at the different districts, it doesn't look like we call out any district for cannabis cultivation business. So-
I noticed that also, but it's, I think both cultivation falls under cultivation and the last category of business activity.
Yeah, cultivation also falls under the definition for cannabis or hemp industrial business, which is allowed as proposed in the general industrial district.
Yeah, it's right here.
No, I understand that, but we have a specific definition for cannabis cultivation business. In all of the zoning districts, we call out all of the other definitions. This is the one definition that we don't call out. Just as somebody who deals with cities and technicalities, and I'm trying to find the nuance. If we're comfortable with the cannabis cultivation business in the industrial district, then I would propose we just add it as, number 8, cannabis cultivation business as we've defined it in the definitions.
Yeah, if you'd like to recommend that for the general industrial district, I think that's something staff would be open to. We'd want to make sure to check with city legal, given that they were the primary writers of this ordinance as drafted, and it is still in that draft form. So we can check with them after this and make sure that either it's intentional or it's an error, and then we add it in.
Yep. And I'm fine if you just check and then update council when they look to adopt.
No, that's a good catch. Thank you.
Anyone else? Since it's a public hearing, I now open the public hearing. Again, seeing there's no one in the public in the room, I will close the public hearing. Bring it back. Any final comments from anyone? I look for the motion then to recommend approval of an ordinance amendment to Chapter 25, zoning, amending Articles 2, 12, 13, 14, and 15 to add definitions and designate appropriate zoning districts for cannabis businesses. Did you want to amend that?
I'm okay as is, so long as staff talks with legal, and then if it
Okay.
needs to go in there, they'll update it before council.
I look for someone to move and second then.
So moved.
I will second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Next is the zoning subdivision code update discussion.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll have the slides up here in just a moment. So as the commission may recall, the city has been working on updating our zoning and subdivision regulations since earlier this year. We've been working with a consultant on this project. It's quite an extensive project, kind of a daunting project, but we're coming back to the Planning Commission for some feedback, and there'll be another opportunity or more opportunities in the days to come for this project and providing feedback on it. So the things that we want to talk about this evening with the commission are there on the screen. So number 1 is the zoning districts, and then use tables and specific standards, dimensional standards, including lots and building standards, and also just some other key development standards that we want to touch on. So like I said, we've been working with a consultant, HKGI. They're a planning and design consulting firm. They have a lot of experience with these code updates and code audits, if you will. We've been focused on primarily Chapter 25 zoning and Chapter 21 subdivision, but we also look at other chapters as well, including the planning and planning development section of our code and our trees. So here is just a high-level look at the schedule. So the code diagnosis, that began earlier this year, back in March, and it concluded in June. Staff and HKGI have been drafting portions of the code since June, and that continues to be ongoing. And then we're kind of in this phase 3 where we're bringing the updates to the Planning Commission and City Council for review and feedback. And then we anticipate adoption early next year. So before moving on to the proposed changes, we just kind of want to cover some of the community engagement that we've done to date. And admittedly, obtaining feedback on this project is pretty difficult given the highly technical nature of the city's zoning ordinance. But we have met with developers and realtors, builders, architects, engineers, and landscape architects in particular too, businesses, folks who have done projects in Oakdale. They've went through the land use approval process. We really wanted to engage with them and get their feedback. We've been working with the chamber, of course, advisory bodies, Planning Commission, Economic Development Commission, and the Tree Board. And like I mentioned, we engaged past applicants who have gone through our process. So they've kind of discovered where some portions of the code just don't make sense, or maybe some portions which they like. We do currently have an online questionnaire that is open to the public through November 15th, and the link for that survey is included in the agenda packet. And as commissioners, you're more than welcome to take the questionnaire, the survey. So one of the big things that we've done is to revise the zoning districts. Currently, if you look at our ordinance, it's all in text form. Each chapter is kind of like a standalone PDF, and what HKGI kind of specializes in is formatting things into tables. That way it's very easy to see, understand, and compare across from one zoning district to another. So as you can see here, the table there, the left-hand side are existing zoning districts. There are 14 of them. And then on the right-hand side, or the right column, are the proposed zoning districts, and we're proposing reducing those down to 10. So we propose reducing the residential districts from 6 to 5, and that is really done also to better align the zoning districts with the future land use categories of the city's comprehensive plan. We're proposing a mixed-use zoning district to align with the comp plan as well, which calls for a mixed-use future land, or which contains a mixed-use future land use category. And that type of a zoning district would provide a lot of flexibility that developers are seeking. We're proposing to consolidate the C1 and C2 districts, and those are our commercial zoning districts, and we also want to consolidate the LB, that's limited business, and G, gateway districts. There's very few of those parcels throughout Oakdale, and we want to consolidate them. We want to eliminate the tower district and simplify that by just allowing communications towers in certain zoning districts, mainly the heavy industrial and general industrial zoning districts, or what we're going to refer to as B3 and B4. We also want to convert wetland-based districts to an overlay district. I mean, that's kind of a best practice in most communities. And finally, we want to update districts with their abbreviations to follow a consistent naming practice. So for example, B1, 2, 3, and so on.
Yeah, so I'll walk through some of the use tables, and these are included in your packet. It can be very hard to see this level of detail with the tables on the screen there, so I'd recommend taking a look at those, and there's so much information included in those. So if you look through that and later tonight you think, this seems out of line, or I'd like to see this included, or perhaps why did you include this and not that? Please feel free to email me or Luke, and we can get that feedback and then make changes from there, as this is all still in draft state.
Maybe I'm saying this too soon, but what do the Ps and the Cs mean?
They've added the key for us on the display, not in the document, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I was confused by that as well.
Yeah, I can walk through that quick as well. So P is permitted by right. So that's a use where it's allowed within that zoning district with no special standards. PS is permitted with standards, so it's allowed if you can meet certain criteria. So there might be extra regulations, say, for different types of businesses, depending on the nature of the business. C is conditional use. Those are the permits that, where it's allowed, but we have to make sure that it's a good fit and it meets specific criteria. We hold public hearings for those. If you recall, Planning Commission meetings where people came in to build oversized garages or second garages or home businesses, those are all conditional use permits we've done in the past. So here we really focused on putting it into a more readable table format. Right now, they're all separate PDFs. And then we tried to consolidate our existing standards into just one article. This reflects a lot of best modern practices. We're seeing cities change to this table approach quite a bit. We also updated the dimensional standards. So that's the lot size, lot width, et cetera, of any given lot in the city based on what zoning district it's in. And that's included in the packet as well and somewhat hard to see on screen. Here we tried to make that easier to read. Again, right now, those are all in separate PDF files. And we did make a few changes that I'll go over in a moment.
Sorry. Is there a map we can look at to see where these zones are?
I can switch. We still have that zoning map pulled up. Give me just a moment.
It's hard to see.
So I recommend taking a look at this maybe after the meeting, as this can really give a good idea of where the different zones of the city are located. This map is admittedly some of the colors blend together, especially on a screen far away. So I can also send you an easier to read map after this meeting.
Thank you.
Generally, the yellows and oranges are residential. So that orange, forgive me, I have to do this just looking at the projector. So that's a more intensive residential district, whereas the lighter ones are less intensive.
And are they labeled R1, R2? They are on the map?
They are. Right now, for some reason, it's rendering in the smartphone version, so it's hard to click on these individual ones. Commercial is red, green is PUD. Those are special zoning districts with a bit more flexibility. And purple down here, that's Gateway District, that one Luke brought up, where there's just a handful, so we're looking to consolidate that.
And what is the Gateway District?
The Gateway District is a special district that's only on this part just northwest of the intersection of 94 and 694. That's been an empty lot for quite a long time. I think the intent behind the Gateway District, and again, Luke and I weren't here when the Gateway District was first drafted, was to try to attract and restrict it to more of a large corporate office campus or large state-of-the-art office facility. With post-COVID realities, we're not sure as staff that can still happen. So we're looking at still allowing that, but maybe expanding it a bit. That I'll hop back into the presentation. So these dimensional standards have again been updated to be a bit easier to read. We did make some changes that I'll go over in a moment. So we tried to improve the clarity and consistency. Right now, there are some standards that are in certain districts and aren't in others. For example, some of the existing R districts, the residential districts, require a certain maximum amount of impervious surfaces, and others do not. And there isn't a lot of consistency there, so we've tried to update that. We're trying to accommodate more modern infill developments that have really shifted in the market in recent years. So if you think of the Willowbrook neighborhood, those are on narrower lots than a lot of the city. Most of the city is 80 feet wide, and a lot of those are 40, 50, 60. So we're exploring the idea of allowing 50-foot lots in some of the denser single-family neighborhoods of Oakdale, not all districts. We're looking to provide flexibility while still offering city discretion on larger projects and just generally better differentiate things. So I mentioned that a little bit. We're proposing a reduced minimum lot size in the denser single-family district R3, which does allow some other uses as well as reducing that requirement for the dense multifamily district R4. We are proposing increasing the maximum building height for the densest district up to 60 feet, but only with a conditional use permit. This is to accommodate, right now it's 40 feet under any conditions. So it's made it so that all of the apartments we're seeing in Oakdale right now are only located in planned unit developments. We've heard that it's very hard to meet the requirements in that multifamily district without needing a lot of variances, and generally variances are hard to get from the state per state statute. You have to really show that there's something related to the property that's preventing you from being able to meet those requirements. So we're exploring the idea of making that a bit more flexible. We eliminated the minimum lot depth just in that if you have a minimum lot width and you have a minimum lot size, largely the depth doesn't really serve a purpose, just in that you're already governing the shape and size of that lot. That's just another constraint there. We added minimum distances between buildings to all districts. Previously, that was only in a few. And again, we mentioned this earlier, but added a maximum impervious surface coverage limit to residential districts that previously did not have it.
Maybe we can pause there if there's any questions on the zoning districts or the dimensional standards.
I got one question, this is just in the back of my head from what I thought I heard rumblings in the legislature last year, that they were gonna not allow cities to keep high density out of residential area. Do you know anything more on that, on where that's at with the legislature and how that would affect us?
Yeah, I was following that bill earlier when it was being proposed. Ultimately, it fell through as there wasn't enough support in either the House or Senate to get that passed, and that would have required duplexes and anywhere where single-family homes are allowed, and would have allowed apartments by right anywhere where you can build commercial structures like strip malls or single-tenant commercial buildings.
So we don't need to worry about that anymore then, right?
Yeah,
At least not now.
It does not apply. And again, we don't know about future legislative sessions. Again, that's always up in the air. But if I had to guess, I'd say it's something pretty unlikely.
I do, just the vocabulary again. Infill development? What does that mean?
Yeah, infill references development in areas where there's already quite a bit of development, but maybe there was a lot that sat empty for a long time, or there was an unusually large lot that someone split off. So sometimes we had one last year, for example, where we had a very, very old lot that for whatever reason, had been empty for a long time in Oakdale, and we had someone come in and build a single-family home there in an existing neighborhood.
One question on your maximum impervious surface coverage. 24% for a single unit home seems to be tight. Do we have anybody that would be negatively impacted by that at this moment?
So I believe that's for the proposed R1 district, is that right? The 24%, so.
And I do believe that's already in place.
I would argue that that's actually quite high. I mean, if you think about a 1 acre lot, you would have almost a 10,000 square foot home just on one level, and you could still comply with that 24%.
It just seemed tight. It seemed tight in thinking about people with a pad for a RV or something, as well as a detached garage and a home. It seemed that might be a little tight for a number of lots. I just was wondering if there's anybody that would be hit by that now.
We have had very few instances where a homeowner or a builder is trying, or they want to propose some type of new improvement, and they're running into that maximum lot coverage. We've seen that very few times. And in particular, the R1 district, those are our largest single-family home properties in Oakdale. So they tend to be quite large.
And just to clarify, though, any of these changes, if you are an existing residential home, business, what have you, and you no longer fit into these new requirements, you become a legally non-conforming use. So we don't go in and we don't tell you, hey, sorry, your house is too big now, you gotta knock it down, or hey, you gotta do such and such. You're kind of grandfathered in, correct?
That would be correct. We've also added language into the introductory provisions chapter, and this text will become available once we've finalized the draft. We'll send it to everyone on a platform that allows you to comment directly on what we've written. We've added language that states that these rules that we're adopting today apply to every development starting today, and everything passed before this is legal within the previous ones. And this is also something I think we've worried about as staff, and we've tried to take care to make sure that we aren't creating those non-conforming properties. I would say for the vast majority of districts, we would actually be accommodating more current non-conforming properties and bringing them into conformity. For example, a lot of the Tanner's Lake neighborhood, many of those lots can't meet the current standards, and we can't guarantee that all of them would, but there would be ones that would meet that standard after some of these changes.
Okay.
I have a couple questions here. 27-foot side setback for manufactured home parks. It just seems an odd number. I'm curious how we got to that versus 25 or 30 feet.
Yeah, that is an error. I apologize. We must have used an old spreadsheet by accident because we went through and noticed that that is a very odd number and specifically corrected those in our most recent draft. So that should read, I want to say we set it to 10 to be consistent with other districts because we want to make sure we're not singling out any specific district.
And then for building height, do we have any mechanism to allow the height to be exceeded via towers or, anything? It's something that I just run into in my day job. We have towers on the building, and it always trips us up because they take the height of that versus 90% of the building is at 20 feet, or as an example.
Yeah, we're looking to clarify the way that we measure from top to bottom. And also we do have a provision right now in the existing code that allows towers, spires, other architectural features, and religious uses. We were considering removing that religious component.
Anyone else have questions?
I think the only comment I had was just the limiting of lot depth. For some reason, I think about like a new apartment complex coming up and having the height for a car to park underneath the complex. Maybe just like reasoning there, or
Yeah, we do have minimum parking requirements, so that way based on the number of units, they have to provide a certain amount of parking. And there's other components as well to make sure that we're not just creating a sea of asphalt.
okay.
Another component would be a required building setback, or the required distance that a building has to be from a lot, the nearest lot line. So by default, those types of provisions would ensure that, that you're not getting a building that's just, that there's no wiggle room there, so.
Have we considered any parking setbacks as well?
Setbacks, let me check here.
I mean, just kind of to force that landscaping, you know, a landscape buffer around a property.
I believe some of the existing industrial districts have that. It's something we can look into.
Primarily for the business districts, obviously.
Okay, well, we'll jot that down. Yeah, as Max was alluding to, we actually have some parking lot setback requirements currently, so we'll just make sure that they do follow through and get relayed into this new code update. So. Okay. Unless there are any questions, we can move on to the next section here.
The 2025 Draft Planning Commission Work Plan.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We're still on this one.
Oh,
He just paused.
okay.
We got 7 more slides, so bear with us just a moment. So.
Yeah, this is very dense material, and we recognize that. So.
You're speaking my language, guys.
We have a handful of general development standards that we're also looking at updating along with the zoning districts and those dimensional standards. So performance standards, exterior design standards or architecture, parking, loading, circulation, sidewalks and similar infrastructure, tree preservation, landscaping, screening, fencing, and lighting. And in particular, we want to focus on 3 of those. So the exterior design standards, the parking, and the landscaping. And we have a series of questions. But first, maybe some information to kind of tee it up here. For parking, so currently we calculating parking can be quite difficult with our current zoning code. For example, if you take the industrial warehousing parking requirements, those are based on peak employment shifts, which can vary and can change whenever one business moves out and a new business comes in. Another example would be multifamily parking requirements is done by or calculated by bedroom units as opposed to dwelling units. So the breakdown can be a little tricky to work with at times. So through our analysis and working with HKGI, we've identified that the current requirements for parking appear to exceed modern needs. And we're proposing also consolidating parking standards, again, from that PDF format, one page and containing a bunch of text and organizing it into a table so you can quickly turn to that section and compare, one category to the next. It just helps with readability, usability, and kind of alluding to this item here is that we're proposing to reduce the minimum spaces. So any thoughts from the commission on just generally reducing the number of parking spaces for development?
Been a hot topic for most of the people who've been building in the last couple of years. So.
I think we've gone over this quite often, so.
I think it's important that we have a mechanism to be able to modify the parking requirements. I've worked in municipalities where, because of some of the old standard, the old language, hey, you have to have 600 or 800 parks for your business, which is just way overkill. Now it's a specific type of business. But those municipalities did not have any mechanism to adjust. So you end up building this excess sea of parking. Even in here, I think there's still quite a bit, under apartment dwelling as an example. An additional half space per unit shall be provided for visitor parking. 100-unit building with 50 visitor stalls, plus all of your standard, tenant stalls, that seems like a lot. So maybe something for that, maybe it's a graduated scale. Under 50 units, you have X, 75 units, you have Y, 100 units, and it goes kind of down as those unit counts go up. But generally speaking, lowering parking counts, I'm not inherently opposed to.
One thing with that, the spaces listed in here, the new ones. We unfortunately got that pretty close to when this meeting was happening, but Luke and I have already identified, we'd like to explore like for a flat rate for units in apartment buildings to simplify that. While we can still accommodate guest parking, we don't want to call it out separately. We'd rather roll that into one if we can. Otherwise, looking into mechanisms, we can absolutely ask our consultant if they've done that before and what other cities might be a good model into allowing for flexibility if it just the type of business doesn't work with that amount of parking.
I don't know if this makes sense, but I've seen a number of codes that really simplify this down and, say like retail, 1 per 250, or, and it's just this big catch-all for a lot of these uses. Again, I don't know that we want to get that specific, but maybe something to consider.
Yeah, I think we're headed in that direction in some ways. For example, this is somewhat related to the uses use table, but in our existing zoning code, it calls out every single kind of business specifically. We call out things as specific as sheet music stores and photo labs. So we're moving to just a definition that encompasses just retail and then business services. And so we'd hope to do that with some other categories and streamline the parking requirements that go with it.
Any other thoughts on parking before we move on? Okay. So landscaping, one of the things that we're looking at doing is to consolidate and clarify the standards. We've heard it from some experts, landscape architects, that our regulations can be a little bit challenging to work with, even to interpret. We want to right-size the minimum number of trees that are required for development. So our current standard is 1 tree per 800 square feet of landscape green area. Like I said, that can be difficult to calculate, and that can also vary by the site, the layout of the site, the design. We want to consider reducing the requirements or explore a different metric just for ease of understanding. And a couple things that we're proposing here, or kicking around the idea of, is utilizing the building footprint size to determine the number of trees that would have to be planted, or the site perimeter being the the boundaries of a site has to be provided X number of trees. So any strong opinions on the proposed metrics that we're using?
Just to give an example of a complexity with the 1 tree per 800 square feet, in a lot of the commercial districts, you're allowed to build up to, say, 90% impervious surface, leaving just 10% of landscape green area. On a smaller site, that can lead to actually very few trees being required.
Site perimeter seems a bit vague as well, because the perimeter could be all 4 sides on one building and 1 side on another, so that may have to be a little more defined than that.
Okay.
I think you're talking, though, I mean, any site, it has generally 4 sides. You're just adding up the perimeter of that, and then it's just a simple calculation. I'm more in favor of the site perimeter versus building size, because I think, if I put a 10,000 square foot building or a 30,000 square foot building, my site is still the same. I feel to some extent I should have to landscape it the same regardless of the size of the building I put on there. Because I don't want to put a tiny little building on this big site and then it's just a sea of sod, because I didn't have to, my building was so small I only needed to put in 3 trees, something like that. Do we have a fee in lieu?
I don't believe that we have a fee in lieu, but you have to, if you're going to deviate from the requirements, then you would have to seek a variance from council for this.
Because that's something that I've seen before is, we just physically couldn't fit any more trees on the site. And so I think we were short 6 or 8 or something like that. And the city had a fee in lieu program where we wrote them a check, they put it into their tree fund, and then plant trees somewhere else within the community.
It's interesting that's an interesting point, because we do have a fee in lieu for our tree preservation requirements, which is not quite what we're talking about in this context. But yeah, so there is precedent in other,
Parks,
yeah.
yeah.
We can keep rolling along here, so. Exterior design standards or architecture of buildings, and currently our standards apply to commercial, industrial, and public buildings. We have 3 categories or classes for exterior surface materials, and they are classes 1, 2, and 3. They're at the bottom. How the classes work, class 1 is understood to be as some of the more durable materials that you could have on the exterior of a building, such as brick or stone. And then as you move down the classifications 2 and 3, so an example of class 2 would be EIFS, or exterior insulation finishing systems. Some of that
Basically like stucco.
stucco, thank you. Yep. And then class 3 would be wood, for example, would fall under that category. So as you can see from that table, office and commercial requires a minimum of 70% class 1, and then it can consist of 30% class 2 or 3, and then industrial warehouse, minimum 60%, and that can be class 1 or 2, and then a maximum of only 40% class 3. So you may recall that there have been deviations from these requirements for recent development proposals, and they've kind of been a topic of interest between both staff and the commission and the city council. So we do have a series of questions for you here. So the first one, are some of the minimum and maximum requirements a little too specific?
Yes.
Should there be more flexibility to allow fewer class 1 materials on building facades that are less visible from the public right-of-way?
That was one of my thoughts.
Yes.
Hey, if you can't see it, can I just do a class 2 EIFS along the back of the building? That seems to make a lot of sense. Doesn't negate the need to have your 70% on your public-facing facades, but.
And things like that dog shelter we just had up recently. I mean, they only needed doggy doors on it, and they wanted them to put materials around these doors that the dogs are gonna ruin anyways, and it's like, the code didn't really give any leeway to get around that. It's like, I think besides the building itself, what is the purpose of the building? And you should have maybe a way to do your design standards around the purpose of the building too.
I recall on that one, we had a problem on the street facing side as well. That was it like 2 or 3% of the materials? She was short on something, but it was glass windows. That one was too tight, I think, the design as prepared there, I think, should have been allowed because it was meeting appearance requirements basically, but not the letter of the rule.
Right, I think that the technicality was that the materials around the door frames and the windows do not count towards your class 1 requirements. So. The next question here, is there interest in the exterior surface materials requirements for being applied to residential buildings? So for example, multifamily or possibly single family, and also accessory buildings such as sheds and garages.
I guess I wouldn't, the way I would interpret it is multifamily is falling into that kind of business, commercial type category, and so they're required to meet those types of criteria. I don't think, it doesn't appear to be an issue in single-family residential or like duplexes or anything like that, so I don't know that we need to chase a solution for a problem that isn't there. Same with accessory buildings.
Stepping back to that last question though, too, about class materials. Materials are changing all the time. You have new materials come online, and I think we need to have a better way when something meets a standard, but it's not listed in our thing to be able to get that in there.
Agreed.
One of the questions that's always been in my mind, we select three categories of them. Why are we selecting it? Is it mostly for appearance and trying to keep conformity? Maybe there's a better way of expressing it. So that it doesn't, so that new materials don't necessarily fall outside of the category and not be allowed.
I think the original thought process behind it was durability more so than appearance, but appearance is also a big factor with the types of materials that are required for the particularly commercial buildings.
One of the, again, and I apologize, it's just my experience, so it's what I can go back to. You know, the product that I work on, we use an aluminum metal paneling on our building, and we find that in a lot of cities, we get hung up on it, and they want us to, you know, they don't allow it, they want us to use a different material, and to Tom's point, it's a durable, long-term material. It's gonna be on that building for the next 25, 30 years without any problems. So we need to make sure that we have a mechanism to allow those types of things. To your question about accessory buildings, I would just say the accessory building needs to be comparable and kind of use the same materials as the primary structure. So if your primary structure is 70% class 1 and brick and stone and glass and things like that, that's what your accessory building has to be. If your accessory building, or if your primary structure is a residential home and you've got, you know, vinyl siding, your accessory building should be something comparable.
Is there maybe a percentage that you might have in mind?
I'm not a big fan of limiting what residents can do on their own homes. City's already in your business enough, so. I mean, that's getting down to like, do we want to make them use aluminum siding or steel siding? You know, it's starting to get nitpicky on residential, I think.
I think at least on the commercial side, it's just, you know, whatever the standard is on the primary structure, that's your standard on the accessory structure.
Okay, no, those are good points. Some more questions here. And again, these pertain to exterior design standards. So should some additional surface materials be allowed based on appearance, durability, and lower environmental impacts? And we have a series of examples here. Architectural metal wall panel systems, fiber cement wall panel systems, EFIS, as I mentioned earlier, veneer masonry wall systems, both full and thin veneer. So to be clear, the example shown on the screen, right now we do not consider those Class 1 materials, but open to your suggestions if maybe this would fall under the Class 1 category.
I guess I go back to my metal example. I would argue architectural metal wall panel systems could fall into a Class 1. I think everything else is probably still a solidly Class 2 material. EFIS feels like it needs to be at least, you know, above a 42-inch plane, just because it's it's essentially just a thin layer of stucco over a sheet of insulation, and so it's easily damaged. And if you make it too accessible, then you're just creating, I mean, what we're trying to get to is, as you said, longevity. If I bring that down to grade, it's easily damaged, and then now you've got to have your property owners repairing it, and it becomes issues and things like that. So there's still, at least again, on the commercial side, a base level of those class 1 solid materials that we need to have.
I realize we don't have Mike here, and he would have some expertise and a lot of thoughts on this discussion as well. One more set of questions for exterior design standards. So currently, our zoning code prohibits pre-engineered metal buildings, yet they are not defined. And kind of similarly or not similarly, but on the topic of metals, superior metals are considered class 1 materials. How should these types of metals be defined? We've struggled with this as staff, as proposals have come through recently. And would a limitation on the amount of metal on the exterior of a building be more appropriate? So for example, building cannot have more than 25% metal. And maybe that'd be a way of simplifying, allowing metal on the exterior of a building.
Are you talking about like shipping containers or some of these things you can see on Amazon, the tiny homes? Prefab, is that what you mean?
Not necessarily the shipping container situation, but like a commercial building that is what would be, it would consist mostly of metal, and sometimes the developer's definition of the metal material used does not align with what staff interprets to be a class 1 metal, for example. I don't know if that makes sense. There's just a discrepancy or a disagreement in terms of what metal is classified as class 1.
Which is why I was coming up with saying, is it based on appearance or durability, as you brought up? Where in there are we really trying to draw a line?
And then those two considerations kind of blend together, or they kind of conflict at times as well. And so
if we allowed a prefab metal building, I'm thinking like the Morton Building Systems, those types of things. You could inherently, I mean, you could presumably still say you have to meet the 70% class 1 materials. So you can drop this prefab building in, but you're going to have to clad the whole thing in brick, stone, glass, and decorative metals. So it's almost a way of allowing it, but you're still forcing ultimately traditional architecture because you lose some of the savings when you have to clad it back in those materials.
right.
Is that a big issue? Have we had a lot of people come in trying to do kind of prefab metal buildings?
I would say just within the last year, we've struggled with this the most, just with a couple developments, the developer saying that, arguing the point that what they're proposing is not like a pre-engineered type structure. It's a superior metal, whereas staff does not quite see it that way. Even on a recent multifamily proposal, the exterior of that building consisted of a portion of, I'm forgetting what type of metal it was, but there was still kind of that dispute or conflicting viewpoints that, the material, the developer saying it's a higher level of material and staff interpreting it differently.
So how do you ultimately decide what's a superior metal and what's not? Do you have is there a guidebook that tells you what it is, or is it subjective, or?
So under our current code, were you going to say something, Max?
I think that's something we're struggling with as staff as we look at these components of the code.
So currently, if there is a proposal on the table, the first thing that we do is, as staff, is take it to our development review committee, and that just consists of, planning staff, building, engineering, public safety. None of us are architects, so we just don't have quite that specialty. If a development proposal goes through the process, the developer could make the case to the city council that, a material is a class 1 or it's a superior metal type. The other thing that we've done as staff is, for some of these proposals, we've worked with a consultant to get a third-party outside opinion on it. But we're still struggling with this.
I guess I'm more concerned about metals as part of the finish system versus a prefab metal building. I don't know, to me, that doesn't seem like it's a huge issue. Yeah, there's probably gonna be some developers that wanna do it, but, maybe we're not the right city for you. But I would like to be able to allow metal finishes, because again, to Tom's point, materials are continually changing and there's always new innovations, and I don't want to have to tell people it just has to be brick and stone.
Besides that, then your city looks like brick and stone and everything looks the same.
That's kind of what we're going for to some extent, though.
A little bit, but,
Yeah.
If everything looked like your Valvoline station and you got them on,
So I think that wraps it up for the questions that we have, but happy to hear more thoughts or if you have questions.
I'm just wondering, is there a rule about sidewalks and when they have to put in sidewalks in developments? When I first moved here, that was a huge problem because 50th Street didn't have a sidewalk. And my kids, we lived really close to the school, but it was too dangerous for them to walk there. And then you see what's happened on Century. It's like a nightmare. People try to walk and they're risking their lives. I'm just wondering, are there ordinances or rules about that? Putting in sidewalks when you have a lot of, especially with density, but even without.
You want to take that?
Yeah, so we do have some requirements, including when land is subdivided. The issue there is most of the land has been subdivided in the city. A lot of our planned unit developments, so think by Target or down by the bus rapid transit stations, the Tanner's site, we have required that sidewalks be installed comprehensively in the, particularly in the bus areas as well as Tanner's. And with each new project in Oakdale Marketplace, that's where Target is, we've required additional sidewalks be installed. I also worked on a project for our bike and pedestrian plan for the city. I'd be happy to send you a copy, in which we analyzed as a part of that project, where are our sidewalks, where are our trails, where are we seeing the most accidents, fatalities, and what gaps are we seeing? Where are the destinations where we really need this? So each time a project comes up in one of those areas where there's a big gap, that's something that we really try to prioritize, is making sure that the gap is filled. Century Avenue was the biggest takeaway from that study. It has a very high accident rate, a high fatality rate. It's where the majority of pedestrian accidents were concentrated throughout the entire city. The issue there is it's a state road. They will be studying that road in the next few years for an eventual road project, the state will. And so we're hoping to really engage and lobby hard to make sure that we get some sort of pedestrian infrastructure along that corridor, just given what we hear from the community and all of the issues we've had along there.
Thank you.
Other questions before we wrap up here? Comments?
You said there was a survey online somewhere?
Yes, and the survey link is actually in the packet. Let's see if I can find that really quick.
19.
If you also go to the front page of oakdalemn.gov, it's towards there's some squares towards the bottom, and it should be one of the first ones.
It's a quick survey, and we made it for the general population, or the general public, using a lot of images, trying to just make it as understandable, easy to use as possible.
Yeah, the park survey was a bear to get through.
Much simpler than that one, yes.
I think we estimate this one at about 5 minutes. It's nowhere near the level of in the weeds detail that we've had tonight. So to conclude up this, again, we're working on writing the actual text, and we will share that once the code text has been drafted. We're looking to review that again November and December, and hopefully adopt in the early part of next year. Happy to take any additional code update questions. Otherwise, we can move on as well to the next business.
Anyone have any further questions?
Didn't see anything in here about chicken coops.
Technically within the animals chapter, so outside of the scale of this
Different
one.
chapter, yes. Okay, moving on then to the 2025 Draft Planning Commission Work Plan.
Thank you. So the purpose of the work plan is to give the Planning Commission some guidance and for their efforts throughout the year 2025. The Planning Commission is a little unique when you compare it to other advisory bodies of the city in that state statute specifies your role, particularly for land use applications and other things like the city's comprehensive plan. So that in that sense, it does make this work plan pretty standardized, and it very much looks like the work plan that we saw in 2024. So not much has changed, and I'll just walk through this work plan briefly. So on the left column there is the title for various activities that the Planning Commission does. So the first one, development applications, which is guided by our ordinance, our zoning and subdivision regulations. As most of you know, the role of the Planning Commission is to review land use applications, so rezonings, subdivision, site plans, and so on, and you provide a recommendation to the City Council. Again, that's spelled out very clearly in state statute. Moving on to studies, plans, and programs, that is guided by the comp plan. And one thing that we anticipate probably, early next year, right, Max, is we anticipate having a small area plan for the area that is roughly in the 12th and Geneva area. So think that a commercial area with MC Pub. We're looking at studying that area and possibly proposing some future land use options there. Number two there is conduct some early prep work for the next comp plan update. More details to come on that. And I don't know if any of the commissioners were around for the previous comp plan update. Dallas? Nope. No one else?
Lee was the only other one who was here.
Okay. So we're actually going to be gearing up for the next comp plan update here soon enough. And then other long-range plans that the city might be bringing forward. We don't quite know if we have any scheduled for next year, but it's always a possibility that something might pop up. So moving on to ordinance updates, the comp plan, and the League of Minnesota Cities. Those sources of information provide guidance here. The first kind of subtask is hold a public hearing for any changes to the zoning and subdivision regulations, and then provide a recommendation to the city council for those updates. And then last is commissioner education. On certain years, it seems to be like every other year now that we've kind of gotten into a rhythm, we'll do educational events, trainings. Earlier this year, we had the development bus tour. Some of you were on that bus tour. It was just an opportunity to actually get in the community and see new developments, and staff. We were talking through some of the details about those developments. We might have some educational opportunities incorporated into our regular meetings. I believe there might be something scheduled for early next year. I'll have to confirm with our city clerk. And then on occasion, staff will prepare some informational memos on various topics, that kind of hot topics that might be of interest to the commission. And we try to get ahead of those topics before we start seeing a bunch of land use applications on those. So like I said, not much has changed really from the 2024 work plan. And in terms of next steps, we'd like to incorporate any feedback that you have into the work plan before it would be brought forward to the city council for approval. So
I know I brought this up before in the commissioner education. At least when I started, there was a class, online class taught through the League of Minnesota Cities that covered the legal responsibilities of planning commissions. Is that no longer available, or have we dropped participation in that?
I'm unsure if the class is available, but they've created a handbook for people in planning commissions that's free and fully available on the website. And then they also have a handbook for city staff that looks at different Minnesota-specific components of the applications we see in Planning Commission, and that can be worth a look as well for additional detail.
Okay, I just recall I had to pass their test at the end of it. That's the main thing.
Bo, did you have to pass any tests to get on the board here, or the commission? Okay.
it's an interview, a council interview. So,
And show up.
yeah.
I'll
Okay,
take a test, though. That sounds nice. I'll take the test. Just to see if we
take the
can pass,
class.
fail, right?
well, yeah, it was, they gave you a percentage, but it was the class was basically legal responsibilities and laws covering land use. So it was very useful.
What was the name of the website? What was the name of the website?
League of Minnesota Cities.
League of Minnesota City, okay.
It'll determine if we vote you off the island or not.
Apparently not, though, in that case. Anything else from anyone on this?
No, I think this looks good.
Fine.
I'm hoping to get on one of these bus tours one of these years.
I know.
Actually, pretty neat.
Is that with the rest of the city council or just the other commissions, the bus tour?
It was a combination of all of them.
Oh, okay.
City council members and any commissioners that wish to come.
Okay.
Filled the bus.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah, only comment I had was just the various topics of interest when we were talking about all the superior metals, staying ahead of that. That's just something to learn more about, I suppose.
That's not a bad idea.
If seeing no other comments, I guess we can move on to staff liaison updates.
Thank you, Chair. Just a few updates here very quickly. So council member, our council liaison already touched on this, the Tanner's Lake redevelopment. So the land use applications was approved by the city council on October 8th. If you recall of the last planning commission meeting, the request for Enclave Helmo Station, that is expected to go to the city council on November 26th. They're working on some updates to their plans. They really took the feedback that they received from the planning commission at your last meeting, and they're working to address some of those issues. Expect a December 5th planning commission meeting. We have two land use applications. One is for a pylon sign, and then another is for home occupation. And last thing, just have a good Thanksgiving.
Thank you very much. Commissioners' updates. Anyone have any updates they wish to present?
No updates, but can I ask staff a question?
Sure.
I had heard at one point that the city was something like 96, 97% built out. Do we know what that number is?
Seems pretty high, but
Yeah, I'd need to take a look. Certainly, we've had more of the city built out with the Willowbrook neighborhood, but even that is about halfway built out, and that's a pretty sizable chunk of the city. But I imagine that's something that I'll run map analysis of once we get more into the comp plan process.
Sounds good. That's all I got.
Okay, any other questions?
When's Aldi's opening?
That depends on all these.
That's a much more important question, yeah.
Yeah, we're hearing spring 2025, but that's always subject to change.
And we have already had our council liaison update, so I ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Thank you very much. Good night.
thank you.